05:17 a.m. Eastern Europe, forward border zone. The checkpoint had been quiet for days. Too quiet. A thin strip of cracked asphalt cut through open farmland, ending at a reinforced NATO checkpoint constructed from concrete barriers, observation towers, and layered defensive positions. It wasn't meant to stop an invasion. It was meant to signal presence, and presence in modern warfare could be just as dangerous as firepower. 05:19 a.m. First sensor contact. Buried seismic sensors embedded beneath the road trembled. At first, it looked like background noise, distant construction, heavy trucks, even natural ground shift. Then the pattern stabilized. Rhythmic, heavy, approaching. A technician inside the checkpoint's operations container froze. "That's not civilian traffic," he muttered. 05:21 a.m. Confirmation. Thermal cameras swung east. At the horizon, heat signatures appeared. Large, rectangular, and moving in formation. Not trucks. Tracked vehicles, heavy armor. 05:22 a.m. Alarm without panic. The checkpoint commander didn't shout. He didn't need to. "All stations, we have armored movement approaching the zone. Maintain posture. Do not escalate." Inside the perimeter, NATO troops snapped into readiness. Not frantic, not aggressive. Professional. Weapons stayed lowered. Anti-armor systems remained covered. Drones stayed grounded. For now. 05:24 a.m. Visual identification. The tanks emerged from the morning mist. Dark green hulls, low silhouettes, reactive armor plates catching the faint sunrise. Russian main battle tanks. More than one, more than five. An armored column moving deliberately toward a border checkpoint that had no business seeing them this close. 05:25 a.m. Rules of engagement tighten. At higher headquarters, screens filled with live feeds. They're inside the buffer zone. Confirm intent? There was no intent broadcast. No radio hail, no warning. Just steel advancing on concrete. 05:27 a.m. Tank commanders see the checkpoint. Inside the lead tank, the Russian commander studied the terrain. The checkpoint was visible now. Flags flying, troops present, weapons visible, but not aimed. It wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. 05:29 a.m. The first halt. At exactly 1,200 meters, the Russian column slowed. Tracks ground into the soil. The lead tank stopped, then the second, then the third. The engine stayed running. That detail mattered. 05:30 a.m. NATO response adjusts. The checkpoint commander issued quiet orders. Bring javelins to ready, but keep them concealed. Deploy recon drones at low altitude. No one fires unless fired upon. The troops understood the unspoken truth. If this turned kinetic, it would be fast and irreversible. 05:32 a.m. The drone feed. A small reconnaissance drone lifted silently from behind the checkpoint. Its camera zoomed in. Tank hatches were closed. Main guns were level. Not raised, not depressed. Machine guns were unmanned. This wasn't an assault posture. It was something else. 05:34 a.m. Psychological pressure builds. Minutes passed. Then more. Engines idled. Dust settled. No one spoke on the radio. This was pressure without movement, and it was working. 05:36 a.m. A single tank moves forward. The lead tank lurched. Just once. It advanced less than 10 meters, then stopped again. The NATO commander felt his jaw tighten. "They're testing our line," he said. 05:38 a.m. Weapons come into view. From behind the checkpoint barriers, NATO anti-armor teams shifted slightly. Not enough to be threatening, enough to be seen. The message was subtle but unmistakable. We are ready. 05:40 a.m. Command-level debate. At NATO headquarters, voices overlapped. If they cross the checkpoint, we must respond. But firing first could trigger something far bigger. The decision was postponed. Seconds mattered now. 5:42 a.m. The unexpected signal. Suddenly, the Russian tanks shut down their engines. One by one, the silence was jarring. No dust, no vibration, just cold steel facing concrete and sandbags. 5:43 a.m. A new element appears. From the rear of the column, an armored personnel carrier advanced slowly. Unlike the tanks, it had markings clearly visible. White tactical symbols. A communications vehicle. 05:44 a.m. Radios crackle. For the first time since detection, a transmission came through. Clear, calm, in accented but fluent English. NATO checkpoint, this is Russian ground command. Maintain position. Do not deploy weapons. The checkpoint commander stared at the speaker. State your intent, he replied. There was a pause, longer than expected. 0545 a.m. The Russian voice returned. Lower now. This is not a drill. You are standing on a contested corridor. Behind the tanks, more heat signatures appeared. Infantry, dismounting, spreading into the tree line. The situation had just crossed a line. Russian tanks rolled toward a NATO checkpoint. They stopped. They waited, and then they spoke. But what they planned next would determine whether this remained a standoff or became the first shots of a ground war. 0549 a.m., the contested corridor. At regional headquarters, maps were pulled up, some digital, some paper. The corridor in question was narrow, a strip of land that had existed for decades in a legal gray zone managed by agreements no one trusted fully. Old treaties, revised borders, and provisional access rights overlapped here like scars. We've always treated this as NATO-administered, an officer argued. Russia never fully acknowledged that, another replied. The truth sat uncomfortably between them. This was not a sudden provocation. It was a long-delayed reckoning. 0551 a.m. Russian ground command speaks again. The radio crackled at the checkpoint. NATO forces, this corridor is under joint security review, the Russian voice said. Your checkpoint is obstructing an authorized movement. The commander kept his response steady. You are inside a monitored zone. Any advance will be interpreted as hostile. A pause followed, measured, deliberate. We are not advancing, the Russian replied. We are asserting presence. Presence. The word hung heavy. 0553 a.m. Pressure without contact. Minutes dragged. Russian infantry continued to reposition, never crossing an invisible line, never breaching the checkpoint's perimeter, but always close enough to be unmistakable. NATO troops mirrored the movement. Sweat beaded beneath helmets. Trigger fingers stayed disciplined. The ground itself seemed to hum with tension. 0556 a.m. Command escalation level raised. Higher up the chain, escalation protocol shifted, not publicly. Quietly, NATO rapid response units were put on standby. Artillery batteries were alerted, but held. Air support was notified, but not tasked. Every option was prepared, none authorized. Russia mirrored the posture. Both sides knew the danger of miscalculation. Both sides also knew the cost of appearing weak. 0559 a.m., the first provocation. It wasn't a shot. It wasn't a shout. It was a vehicle. A Russian armored personnel carrier edged forward, not toward the checkpoint, but sideways, angling closer to a NATO observation tower. The movement was subtle, intentional. On the NATO side, a platoon leader keyed his radio. If they're testing reaction time, they just found it. 6:01 a.m. Warning signals. The NATO commander made a decision. A flare arced into the sky. White, bright, unmistakable. A warning, nothing more. The APC stopped instantly. Russian infantry froze mid-step. For a moment, it worked. 6:03 a.m., the human factor. Then something small went wrong. A Russian soldier slipped on loose gravel near the tree line. He caught himself, but his rifle swung up. Just for a second, on a NATO rooftop, a sentry flinched, a scope aligned. Someone shouted, "Weapon up!" Time slowed. 6:16 a.m. Russian proposal. The Russian ground commander transmitted again. We propose joint inspection of the corridor. No weapons. Limited personnel. The NATO commander didn't answer immediately. He consulted, then replied, "We will not disarm." Another pause. "Nor will we," came the response, but neither side advanced. 6:19 a.m. The ground changes. Seismic sensors trembled again, not from tanks, from beneath. A low rumble rolled through the soil, distant but growing. At first, it was mistaken for aircraft. Then engineers identified it. Subsurface movement. 6:21 a.m. The hidden variable revealed. Geological scans, rarely used in such scenarios, were activated. What they revealed stunned both commands. Beneath the corridor lay an old underground transit route, part tunnel, part hardened conduit, long forgotten, undocumented in modern maps. It ran directly under the checkpoint, and it wasn't empty. 6:23 a.m. Realization hits. Thermal anomalies showed recent activity. Machinery, power draw. Someone had been using it. The question was who? 6:25 a.m. Accusations begin. NATO analysts suspected Russian covert engineering. Russia denied involvement. Each side provided partial evidence. Neither explanation fully fit. The tunnel's construction dated back decades, long before current tensions. 6:28 a.m. A third actor emerges. Signals intelligence flagged something else. Encrypted transmissions, low power, burst-based, emanating from beneath the corridor. Not NATO, not Russian, unattributed. The same conclusion formed on both sides. They were not alone. 6:30 a.m., the standoff recontextualized. Suddenly, the tanks and troops were no longer the center of the story. They were guards. The real issue lay underground. If the tunnel was compromised, if sabotage or surveillance was underway, it threatened infrastructure far beyond the checkpoint. Energy lines, communications, regional stability. 6:44 a.m., immediate fallout. Orders came down fast. Secure the site. Do not remove equipment. Document everything. This was no longer a border dispute. It was an international security breach. 6:48 a.m. De-escalation begins. Russian infantry pulled back from the tree line. NATO teams relaxed their forward posture. Tanks remained, but engines stayed off. The checkpoint exhaled. 6:52 a.m. Strategic aftermath. Within hours, statements were crafted. Carefully neutral. Joint discovery. Cooperative security. No mention of tanks. No mention of near misses. The public would never know how close this had come to bloodshed. Days later, quiet changes. The corridor was closed temporarily. Inspections followed. Agreements were revised. New protocols established. Not because of diplomacy, because of proximity. Russian tanks rolled toward a NATO checkpoint. They stopped just short, not because of fear, not because of firepower, but because something deeper, literally and figuratively, forced both sides to look away from each other and downward. No war began that morning. No hero emerged. No victory declared, but a conflict was avoided. Not by strength alone, but by the realization that escalation can blind even the most prepared forces to threats hiding in plain sight. Sometimes the ground fight doesn't happen above the surface. Sometimes the real battle is deciding not to start one.